You have to measure success in an objective manner. You need to have the data points. We look at having tools and processes in place that are holistic, that is simplified. So ideally, we get a single pane of glass. There are many technologies out there today, and we use one of those that gives us a holistic view and hooks into our cloud environment, hooks into our on-prem, hooks into endpoints, and gives us that view across the environment. And it also gives us insight into how we can mature the environment. So it is very data driven. It is objective. It reduces some of the false positives that you'd have. You don't want to have the complexity with multiple tools. So ideally, you keep it as simple. You collapse that, have that single pane of glass with something that is scalable, that can grow with your organization, but also not give additional overhead and work for the team that makes things confusing. You need responses quickly. You need to be able to act on those, and you need to be able to have data that is very, again, objective. So that's how we measure success. We have data points across the different stack, and that gives us a good idea of where we are today.
From a board perspective, obviously the boards are always interested in understanding how money that's being allocated to security is really being spent, and it's been spent wisely. And so it's really up to management to really try to explain the value of the cybersecurity program to a board without getting too technical. Some of the ways that I've been seeing that I think have been really successful is the use of dashboards and scorecards. I think it gives the boards a very quick and easy way to assess what's going on in the organization, specifically, obviously, with cybersecurity. It's easy to comprehend, easy to digest, and really puts it in terms, as has been said multiple times, in terms of the business. So although it's a technology component, it's all about business. And so I just picked a few that I've seen, KPIs that have been tracked to some of the boards that I'm on. Obviously, intrusion attempts are important, and especially if you trend them, because then the board will kind of see which way the trends are going, and then they can talk about how are we using the tools to address those trends. They're interested in vulnerability patch management, if you can believe it, because the faster we patch, the less risky we are. And it's all about risk at the board. So they understand that if there's a vulnerability out there, we need to patch it quickly. So they're interested to understand KPIs about how quickly it takes to patch them. Do we do them ourselves? Do we need help? They're interested in understanding that we're more vulnerable from the inside than from the outside. So they're trying to look at what kind of users have access to what kind of data, how many users have access to what applications. And then if you put that in terms of the data and the crown jewels that I think Alpha was talking about, you need to talk about what the data is, what the volume of data is it increasing, who has access to the data? So KPIs around that would be meaningful. And then the final one is competition of what our competitors are doing and how are they stacking up in this regard. And boards are always interested in being competitive, and so they're going to want to know what their peers are doing. So I think I could sum it up by just saying, really understand the business, as has been said, understand what your board wants to know, and really turn your KPIs and dashboards to that attention. And I think that'll really help push the dialogue forward.
One of the things we've implemented at EQ that I'd say I'm most proud of, and I wish we'd implemented in past security programs, is a continual improvement practice that is centered on measurement. Over the years, as I've worked in security programs, we've often had a good operational practice that runs the day-to-day operational activities. And then you had perhaps different teams focused on strategic work and project improvements. And it was hard to drive continual improvement and place that in one or both of those teams. So what we've done is we've actually created a separate dedicated function within EQ that's focused on continual improvement. And one of the main functions of that team is running a measurement practice where each month we measure a different domain. We get to all security domains twice a year. So it's a 6-month cycle. And basically what we'll do is we'll do a bit of a deep dive in that domain each month and run through a bunch of measurements, analyses. It takes I'm going to say 5 to 7 hours with some experts to really drill into what are we seeing, what's happening, how effective these controls are. We improve the actual measurements we use each time we go through a cycle. And the result is that each month we come out with 5 to 8 new improvements that were identified that otherwise we had not flagged for attention. And then we would either direct those back to the operational team to make those improvements if they're smaller. If they're larger, we'd put them on the roadmap for a strategic investment. And if you think about doing that every single month over the course of a year, you get 50 to 80 new improvements that you otherwise would not have made. And we track each of those individually. That same team runs our tabletop exercises, red team exercises. So all of these activities that measure the effectiveness of the program, and they're all centered around this concept of continual improvement. Over the course of now a year and a half doing this, we've made a large number of improvements that otherwise we would have missed, and our program would have been far behind where it is today. And just to add on to what Helen mentioned, we take a subset of those measurements and use that as the main dashboard that we use for our board reporting each quarter.
I do subscribe to the dashboard concept. Of course, you can't manage what you can't measure, and that's something that I like to look closely at. What I've found, though, especially as we've scaled up our security operations team globally, I need to look for leading indicators, and unfortunately, it can't be completely quantitative. I've got to look for qualitative signals as well. That's obviously more difficult to do, but not every analyst approaches the problem the same way. And where I find really interesting leading indicators that are admittedly subjective in how those analysts are prosecuting their run books, it gives me a sense of where are those gaps that we need to address that will eventually impact our top line metrics. That is our false positive rate that we are always looking toward, but that's a very lagging indicator for us. So I think it's got to be a combination of both. We're always looking at FP rate, that against our security outcomes, which we actually have now mapped against MITRE, is a good understanding for the coverage that we need and then how we are doing against that coverage, as well as our investigation and response times. We always look at those stats. But again, those are outcomes, they're very lagging. And so we always want to be looking for, hey, where are the quality concerns through our entire pipeline? Those are our analysts plus our machine learning models. And so we're trying to do more end-to-end testing of that and more scenario injects as part of the training and exercising. So this is something that we're beginning to do a lot more, is scenario-based training where we're inserting an inject, we are seeing how the team reacts to it and responds, and we're beginning to measure, looking for those anomalies that might signal a quality problem in how the analysts are actually executing the run books, or maybe what the output of the machines are. So, I think it's got to be both, right? You got to know what you intend to deliver by way of outcome, and then you need to look at how you instrument that process end to end so that you're not only looking at the lagging result, but you're looking as far to the left as you can for signs of quality issues. So it's not perfect, right? This is for us very much still a work in progress, where we've got the machines interfacing with the humans, and even that handover, sometimes you can have things that are lost. So we're trying to get better, and I think end-to-end testing is really key to that end.
Point number one, I think looking exclusively at business outcomes is not effective, since a good portion of cybersecurity posture is about business constraints. So I think it's really about a balance of business constraints and business considerations or business outcomes. So constraints like budget, skill set, time, those are all real factors, right? Real factors in determining how mature my cybersecurity posture will actually be, right? So if I can balance that with a variety of business outcomes, and you can consider them sort of the tactical or the strategic. On the strategic side, you can think of business outcomes as being reflective of a business model. So how we make money, is that going to change based on my security posture? How we spend money, who our clients are we going to attract different clients or different client segments based on the posture that we're at, or how effective we are or not in the cybersecurity program? What are our assets? Is data an asset? Is infrastructure an asset? Is people as an asset? Is our products that we produce and sell in the stores an asset? And how do those change based on that posture? As Helen said, who are our partnerships, who are our competitors, what's our overall value proposition, and does any of that change based on sort of the implementation of our security maturity? And the last thing I'd say is, as I've presented several times as a CISO to the board, or been on the receiving end as a board member from a CISO, what I thought was most interesting in the business outcome reflection was things like public recognition. Is there an outcome where an external entity wants to say, yes, this organization is a model for their security awareness, or reduction of breach impacts, right? So we know the average breach has X amount of cost. Can we create an outcome that reduces that by a significant percentage over time? Maybe an outcome is about workforce awareness, right? How do we increase that awareness to as close to 100% as physically possible? How do we quantify some sort of reputational risk, right? Where a name shows up in the paper or doesn't show up in the paper, and how do we make that as an outcome that we focus on? And then finally, sort of the ecosystem of my own organization. So yes, I play in an industry, I'm part of that industry, I might be part of the supply chain of that industry. So how disruptive would I be, or not disruptive, based on my security posture in the overall sort of economy of that industry? So those are kind of the lenses of business outcomes that I would look at.
So we take a little bit of a different approach in that what the executive team and the board are truly interested in really are two major topics, which Helen sort of spoke to. First is risk, and second is strategic achievement. And the operational pieces, we do report on a dashboard quarterly to them and monthly to our executive team. But we've put in a lot of time with our executive team and our board, reviewing the framework with them so that they understand that there are maturity choices and that there are implications on resources, money, and accessibility. And so what we've done is really said, what is the strategic plan? How does the security roadmap underpin the strategic roadmap? And what does our security maturity level against the framework need to be? So to Paul's point, in some cases, it's a people increase. In some cases, it's a operational increase. So we basically lay out how does the cybersecurity roadmap address and enable the strategic roadmap, and what does it do in terms of reducing risk? And reputational risk for us is a big consideration. So we present quarterly the dashboard, but year over year we present the comparison to risk appetite and the increase in maturity across the framework. So they're able to see what the numbers sort of say. And then I would say we do third-party external validation using various scorecards, benchmarks, and actually inviting in third parties to do an assessment, not so much a hack, but to actually look inside and see, is what we have said we have achieved in the last year valid? And so we present an accomplishment report each year to the board. And so I would say what we've been able to do is link it to some of the newer dashboards, for example, introducing the reduction in risk, but at the same time, the reduction of footprint. So, how much smaller have we made the attack surface if they get in? What is the sense of loss? And those dashboards actually use financial frameworks to relate it to what the reduction in loss cost for us would be.
You've always got to figure out, what do you have? None of us are ever going to be able to spend as much as we'd like to, I think, on cybersecurity. Helen, I felt like I was in front of my board as you were asking some of those questions because, generally there's the feeling of conflating higher cybersecurity spending with better protection. It's just the way it is. And you're always getting those questions of, are we spending enough? What are our competitors spending? And that's generally how people look at this, even though we all know those aren't really the right measures. What is our current level of protection? What's a good measure of cybersecurity value? And how much does it cost? Which leads us to what protection level do we need and what will it cost? I think tying it back to the business outcomes is really where it's all about. For us, right now, we're trying to develop a whole bunch of outcome-driven metrics or ODMs with respect to our investments. So basically abstracting the tools, people, and processes as we try to reflect on how well is our organization protected as opposed to how is it protected? And then next, we're going to be looking at developing a protection level agreement with our business, which really helps to identify, similar to SLAs, what's their risk appetite and what's the corresponding cost in order to deliver to that appetite.